I was wrong to marry you. My husband said it calmly right there at the dinner table like he was commenting on the weather. Then he held out his hand and asked for the ring back. I gave it to him. I walked away without a word. But the next day when I went back for something I left behind, I realized I wasn't the one who had lost everything. He didn't raise his voice. That was the first thing I noticed. There was no anger, no tension in his shoulders, no hesitation in the way he held my gaze. If anything, there was a strange calmness to him, like a man who had already rehearsed this moment perhaps more than once and had grown comfortable with the outcome. I was wrong to marry you. He said it with the kind of quiet certainty that doesn't invite questions, not a discussion, not even an argument. Just a statement laid flat on the table between us alongside two untouched plates and a bottle of wine he had opened but hadn't poured. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. I blinked slowly, searching his face for any hint of irony or regret or even cruelty, but there was none. Just distance. "Excuse me," I asked, my voice steady, though something deep inside me had already begun to shift. He leaned back slightly in his chair, exhaling as if relieved to finally say it out loud. "I should have thought it through more carefully," he continued. "This marriage, it doesn't make sense. Not anymore. Not anymore." The words lingered longer than they should have. I folded my hands in my lap, forcing myself to remain still. "And when did you come to that conclusion?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his glass, realized it was empty, and set it back down again. A small, unnecessary gesture, but one that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. "Does it matter?" he said, finally avoiding my eyes for the first time. "Yes," I replied quietly, "it does." He gave a small, dismissive shake of his head. "Look, I don't want to drag this out. I've already spoken to a lawyer. It would be easier if we handle this quickly and cleanly." "A lawyer?" "Of course." I felt something cold settle into my chest, not pain, not yet, but something sharper. Recognition, perhaps, like seeing the final piece of a puzzle you didn't realize you were solving. "And you're telling me this?" Now I asked. "Over dinner." It seemed like the right time. The right time. I almost smiled. Instead, I studied him more carefully. The pressed shirt, the neat hair, the deliberate calm. He wasn't just prepared, he was confident. Too confident. That was when he extended his hand across the table. "Your ring," he said. Just like that. No hesitation, no emotion. Just a request, as if he were asking for his car keys back. For a brief second, my fingers tightened around the edge of the table, not because of the ring itself, but because of what it represented. Not love, not anymore, but time, investment, trust, and how easily he seemed ready to reclaim it. I looked down at my hand. The diamond caught the light from above, reflecting a soft, familiar glow I had once found comforting. Now it felt irrelevant. Without a word, I slid the ring off my finger, placed it in his palm, closed his hand around it. He didn't thank me. Of course he didn't. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up, smoothing down the front of my blouse, out of habit more than necessity. My movements were controlled, deliberate. I refused to give him anything else, not confusion, not anger, not even the satisfaction of seeing me break. "If you've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, picking up my bag, "then I assume you've decided everything already." "It's straightforward," he replied. "We'll divide things according to the agreement." The agreement. Our prenup. Signed 3 years ago on a bright morning that now felt strangely distant. "Of course," I said softly. He watched me for a moment as if expecting something more, a reaction perhaps, a protest. But I gave him nothing. I turned and walked toward the door. "Claire," he called after me. I paused but didn't turn around. "I think this is for the best," he added. "For the best." I nodded once, though he couldn't see it. Then I stepped out into the night. The air outside was cooler than I expected, carrying the faint scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. I stood on the front steps for a moment, adjusting to the silence, to the sudden absence of his presence behind me. It was strange how quickly everything could end. Not with a fight, not with a storm, but with a sentence. I walked to my car, set my bag in the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, unmoving. I wasn't crying. That surprised me. Instead, my mind replayed the evening in quiet fragments, the calmness in his voice, the lawyer, the ring, the confidence. Too confident. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes briefly. Something about it didn't sit right. Not the divorce itself, I could accept that. People change, marriages end. But the way he had handled it, the precision, the timing, it felt coordinated, as if I had walked into a moment that had been carefully arranged without me. I opened my eyes again, staring through the windshield at the darkened street. Our house. His house now apparently stood behind me, still lit from within. The same warm glow it had always had. The same windows. The same quiet. But something inside it had shifted. I could feel it. I started the engine and pulled away, not looking back. I spent the night at a small hotel downtown, one of those places that tried to feel more expensive than it actually was. The kind with neutral decor and soft lighting designed to make everything feel temporary. Which I supposed was appropriate. I didn't sleep much. Not because I was upset, but because my thoughts refused to settle. They moved in slow, deliberate circles, returning again and again to the same point. He had planned this. The question was how long. The next morning, I stood by the window of the hotel room watching the early traffic build below. That was when it hit me. Not like a shock, but like a quiet realization that had been waiting patiently for me to notice it. My laptop. I had left it in the study. Not just any laptop, my work laptop. The one connected to several shared accounts. The one that held documents, records, access. Important things. I straightened slowly, reaching for my phone. For a moment I considered calling him. Then I stopped. Number. That wouldn't be necessary. I slipped on my coat, picked up my bag, and headed for the door. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as I had left it. Still, silent, unchanged. I stepped out of the car and approached the front door, my heels echoing faintly against the concrete. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly ajar. I frowned, pushing it open slowly. "Hello," I called out, stepping inside. No answer. The house was quiet but not empty. I could feel it immediately. Something was different. Something subtle but undeniable. I moved forward, my gaze scanning the familiar space with new attention. And then, I saw it. Not what I had expected. Not my laptop. Something else. Something that didn't belong. I took another step forward, my breath slowing, my mind sharpening. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just forgotten something. I had walked back into something I was never meant to see. It was the shoes that stopped me. A pair of heels, nude mid-height, carefully placed beside the entryway bench, angled just slightly inward, as if their owner had slipped out of them with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. They weren't mine. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, my gaze fixed on them, my mind refusing to rush ahead. It would have been easy, too easy, to jump to conclusions, but I had never been someone who reacted without thinking, and I wasn't about to start now. Still, there was something about the way those shoes sat there, unbothered, deliberate, that made the air in the room feel heavier. I stepped inside and closed the door softly behind me, the latch clicking into place with a muted finality. "Hello," I called again. No answer. But this time, I didn't expect one. The house held a different kind of silence now, not empty but occupied. Lived in. Changed. I moved slowly past the entryway and into the living room, my eyes adjusting to the small differences I hadn't noticed at first. A throw blanket draped over the arm of the couch, one I didn't recognize. a glass on the coffee table with a faint imprint of lipstick on the rim. Subtle things. Intentional things. I didn't stop walking. Instead, I turned toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. My bedroom. At least it had been. The door was slightly open. I pushed it wider with 2 fingers. And then I understood. The closet door stood ajar, and inside my clothes had been pushed to one side, as if they were an inconvenience rather than belongings. In their place, a new set of garments hung neatly arranged with a care that was unmistakably feminine. Soft fabrics, neutral tones. Familiar. Too familiar. My chest tightened not from heartbreak but from recognition. I stepped closer, reaching out and brushing my fingers against one of the blouses. I had seen it before. Not here. Somewhere else. And then it clicked. Emily. My younger sister. The realization didn't hit me like a wave. It settled. Cold and precise. I straightened slowly, my gaze drifting across the room again, taking in details I might have otherwise ignored: the open suitcase on the bed, half-unpacked a pair of earrings on the nightstand that I knew I had gifted her last Christmas. There was no doubt. Emily was here. Living here. In my place. I let out a quiet breath, steadying myself, not because I was about to fall apart, but because I needed clarity. Emotion would come later. Understanding came first. A faint sound carried from down the hall. Voices. I froze, not out of fear but instinct. They were in the kitchen. I could hear the clink of glass, the low murmur of conversation followed by a laugh. Her laugh. There was no mistaking it. I moved without thinking, stepping back into the hallway, my footsteps silent against the hardwood floor. The angle of the wall gave me just enough cover to remain unseen while still close enough to hear. I didn't step into the room. I didn't need to. I told you she wouldn't make a scene. My husband said, his voice relaxed, almost amused. She's predictable like that. A pause. Then Emily's voice, lighter but edged with something sharper. You're lucky she didn't question anything. Most people would have. She trusts too easily, he replied. Always has. I felt my fingers curl slightly at my sides. Not in anger. In focus. There it was. The shift. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about information. And the accounts Emily asked? Did you move everything? Almost, he said. I started last month. Just needed her out of the house before finishing the rest. Last month. So that was the timeline. You should have done it sooner, she said. Before the prenup even. It wouldn't have held up, he replied. Not without raising questions. This way is cleaner. Cleaner. I leaned slightly closer to the wall, every sense sharpened. So once everything's transferred, Emily pressed. We file, he said. Quick, simple. She walks away with what's outlined, nothing more. And she doesn't know. A small pause. Then a quiet, confident answer. She doesn't know anything. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Not in pain. In acknowledgement. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't betrayal born from weakness or impulse. This was strategy. Planned, executed. And I had been the variable they thought they had already removed. I opened my eyes again, steady. Emily laughed softly. I still can't believe how easy that was. People see what they expect to see, he said. She never looked deeper. I almost smiled. Because that was where he was wrong. I reached slowly into my bag and pulled out my phone. My movements were careful, precise. I didn't rush. The screen lit up briefly before I dimmed it, switching to record. Audio first. Then, adjusting my position slightly, I angled it just enough to capture the edge of the kitchen, their silhouettes visible through the gap, indistinct but recognizable. I didn't need their faces. I needed their voices, their words. And after the transfer, Emily asked again. We consolidate, he said. Move everything into the new structure. It's cleaner that way, less traceable. Less traceable. There it was. The phrase that mattered. The one that would linger longer than anything else they said. I let the recording continue for a few seconds more, long enough to capture the rhythm of their certainty, the ease with which they spoke about dismantling my life. Then I stopped. Carefully, silently. I slipped the phone back into my bag. I had heard enough. Seen enough. More than enough. I stepped back, slowly retracing my steps down the hallway past the bedroom that no longer felt like mine, past the living room with its quiet rearrangements until I reached the front door again. My hand rested on the handle for a moment. Not hesitation. Consideration. I could walk in there, confront them, demand answers, but that would give them something they didn't deserve. A warning. No. I opened the door and stepped outside, closing it behind me with the same quiet care I had used when entering. The sunlight felt different now, brighter, sharper, clearer. I walked back to my car, each step measured, deliberate. Not because I was trying to hold myself together, but because I already was. As I sat behind the wheel again, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. The recording was there. Unedited, unfiltered. Truth captured in their own words. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then locked it. Started the engine. And for the first time since the night before, I allowed myself a small, controlled breath. They thought I had left empty-handed. They thought I had taken nothing with me. But they were wrong. I had taken everything that mattered. And they didn't even know it yet. I didn't go back to the hotel. Not immediately. Instead, I drove slowly at first, then with more intention, until the city shifted around me from quiet residential streets to the steady rhythm of downtown. Traffic lights, crosswalks, people moving through their day as if nothing had changed. As if my life hadn't just been dismantled in a kitchen I used to call my own. I pulled into a parking garage 2 blocks from my office building and sat there for a moment, engine still running, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The recording was still on my phone, untouched, unshared, but it was real. That was what mattered. I turned off the engine, grabbed my bag, and stepped out of the car. The air carried the usual hum of the city, distant sirens, footsteps on concrete, the low murmur of conversations blending into background noise. Normal. Predictable. I needed that. Inside the building, everything was exactly as I had left it the day before. The receptionist smiled as I passed. Offering a polite greeting, I returned without thinking. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I made my way to the elevator, pressing the button for the 12th floor. My floor. My space. One of the few things that still belonged to me. When the doors opened, I walked straight to my office and closed the door behind me. Only then did I allow myself to exhale fully, the tension I had been holding, settling into something more focused. Controlled. I set my bag down on the desk and took out my phone, placing it carefully in front of me. For a few seconds I just looked at it. Then I unlocked the screen and played the recording. Their voices filled the room again, clear, unguarded, confident. She doesn't know anything. Less traceable. I let it play through once, then again, listening not for emotion, but for detail. Names. Timing. Intent. Everything I needed was there. When it ended, I didn't replay it a third time. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened my laptop, my backup, not the one I had left behind, and logged into my email. There was one name I hadn't contacted yet. One person who needed to hear this before anyone else. Daniel Reeves. My attorney? I had hired him years ago, not for anything dramatic, but for routine matters, contracts, business agreements, the kind of legal work that rarely made itself known until it was needed. He was precise, discreet, and more importantly, he didn't miss things. I composed a short message. No emotion, no explanation. Just facts. Daniel, I need to speak with you today. Urgent. I have evidence involving potential financial misconduct and a pending divorce. I'd prefer to discuss in person. Claire. I attached the recording. Then I hit send. He called within 10 minutes. Claire, his voice came through steady but sharper than usual. Are you somewhere private? Yes. I've listened to the file, he said. We need to meet. Now. I'm at the office. I'll be there in 30. He arrived in 25. No small talk, no unnecessary questions. Just a brief nod as he stepped into my office and closed the door behind him. "Play it again," he said. I did. This time I watched his expression instead of listening to the words. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way he leaned forward just enough to catch every detail. When it ended, he sat back in the chair across from me, silent for a moment. Then, "This is significant. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. Just precise." "What does it give us?" I asked. He folded his hands, considering. "Potentially," he said. "A lot." He leaned forward again, his tone shifting into something more analytical. "First, there's the admission of intent, moving assets in anticipation of divorce, with the goal of limiting your share. That alone can be problematic depending on how it was done." "And the prenup?" I asked. "That depends," he replied. "Prenuptial agreements are enforceable, but they're not absolute. If there was material non-disclosure, if one party concealed significant financial information at the time of signing, it can be challenged." I thought back to the conversation in the kitchen. "She never knew what you hid when she signed it." "That's exactly what I heard," I said. He nodded. "Then we have a direction." "And the recording?" I asked. "Is it usable?" He didn't hesitate. "That depends on jurisdiction, but based on where you were when this occurred, one-party consent applies. You were part of the environment. You didn't intercept a private communication unlawfully. So it holds." "It holds enough to matter," he said. That was all I needed. I leaned back slightly, the pieces aligning in my mind. "They think I don't know anything," I said. He gave a faint, almost humorless smile. "That's their first mistake." "And their second?" I asked. They said it out loud. The rest of the meeting moved quickly, efficiently. We outlined steps, not emotional reactions, not confrontations, but actions. Measured, strategic. "Do not contact him," Daniel said. "Do not confront either of them. Let them continue exactly as they are." "Why?" "Because the more comfortable they feel," he replied, "the more they reveal." That made sense. "And in the meantime, we start pulling records," he said. "Bank statements, account histories, any shared financial platforms. If assets were moved, there will be a trail." "There's always a trail," I said. "Exactly." By late afternoon, I had access to everything I needed. Shared accounts I hadn't checked in months. Transaction histories I had never questioned before. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But then, patterns. Small transfers. Unusual timing. Amounts just large enough to matter, but not large enough to trigger immediate attention. Clever. But not invisible. I forwarded everything to Daniel. Within an hour, he responded. "This is consistent with what we heard. Keep going." By evening, I had a timeline. Not complete, but enough. He had started moving assets weeks before the dinner, before the conversation, before the ring, which meant one thing. The decision had been made long before he ever said it out loud. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. There was no anger in me, not the kind people expect. What I felt was something quieter, sharper. Clarity. He had planned everything, every step, every detail. He had believed he was in control. And for a while, he was. But that had changed. Not when I left the house. Not when I heard their voices. But the moment I chose not to react. The moment I decided to listen instead of speak. That was when everything shifted. I picked up my phone again, glancing at the recording one last time before locking the screen. They thought silence meant weakness. That walking away meant surrender. They were wrong. Silence, when used correctly, is a weapon. By the time he filed, I already knew what was coming. Not every detail. He was careful, and I would give him that, but enough to understand the structure of his plan, the rhythm of it, the quiet assumptions he had built into every step. He believed the process would be quick, controlled, almost administrative. A few signatures, a few negotiated lines, and then closure. He believed I would comply. The paperwork arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, delivered to my office in a slim professional envelope that bore the name of a firm I recognized but had never worked with. It was thorough, organized, confident in tone. The petition cited irreconcilable differences, referenced the prenuptial agreement with a kind of quiet authority, and outlined a division of assets that on its face seemed clean. Too clean. I read every page, slowly marking nothing, reacting to nothing, letting the language settle into place. There were no surprises because I had already seen the framework of it in their conversation, but there were confirmations, dates, clauses, assumptions about accounts that no longer reflected reality. Assumptions that relied on my ignorance. I closed the file and set it aside, my expression unchanged, my breathing steady. Then I called Daniel. "They've filed," I said. "I expected as much," he replied. "We're ready." Ready. It was a strange word considering how little time had passed since that dinner, and yet it felt accurate. Not because I had rushed, but because I had refused to waste time reacting. "Next step?" I asked. "We respond," he said. "Formally. And we request mediation. That will be our first controlled environment." Controlled. That mattered. Mediation was scheduled for the following week. Neutral office, neutral table, neutral tone. Nothing about it felt neutral. He arrived first. Of course he did. I saw him through the glass as I stepped into the building, standing near the conference room door, speaking quietly with his attorney. He looked exactly as he had that night, composed, deliberate, confident in the way men are when they believe they've already secured the outcome. For a moment he glanced up and saw me. There was a flicker there. Not fear, not even concern. Just surprise. Brief, contained. Then it was gone. I walked past him without slowing, without acknowledgement, and entered the room. Daniel was already inside reviewing documents, his presence as steady as ever. He looked up as I took my seat, gave a small nod, and returned to his notes. No questions. No reassurances. We didn't need them. When they joined us, the introductions were minimal, the tone professional. The mediator, a woman in her late 50s with a calm, practiced voice, outlined the structure of the session, emphasizing cooperation, resolution, efficiency. Words that sounded good on paper. In reality, it was a negotiation. And negotiations, by definition, are not equal. Not when one side thinks it holds all the information. He spoke first. "I think we can keep this straightforward," he said. His voice measured, his posture relaxed. "We've already agreed on the framework. The prenup outlines everything clearly." He slid a folder across the table toward the mediator, who glanced at it briefly before turning her attention to me. "Claire," she said gently, "have you had a chance to review the proposed terms?" "Yes," I replied. "And your thoughts?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened my own folder, thin, unassuming, and placed it on the table in front of me. Not as a gesture, not as a statement. Just a fact. "My thought," I said finally, "is that the framework is incomplete." A pause. Subtle but noticeable. "In what way?" his attorney asked. I looked at Daniel. He nodded once. "That was enough." "There are assets that have not been disclosed," I said. Transfers that were made prior to filing, accounts that were restructured without mutual consent. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. His expression didn't change immediately, but there was a tightening around the edges, a recalculation happening behind his eyes. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," he said, the first hint of resistance entering his voice. "Of course not." "You will," Daniel replied calmly. He reached into his briefcase and removed a series of documents, organized, tabbed, precise, and placed them in front of the mediator. "Transaction histories," he said. "Account statements. A timeline of asset movement over the past 6 weeks." 6 weeks. The same timeline I had reconstructed. The same timeline they thought I didn't know. The mediator scanned the first page, her expression neutral but focused. "This appears to show a pattern," she said slowly. "It does," Daniel confirmed. one that suggests premeditated transfer of marital assets in anticipation of divorce, with the intent of limiting equitable distribution. The words landed exactly as they were meant to. Carefully, deliberately. He leaned forward now, the calm beginning to fracture not outwardly, but in the small ways that matter. "These are routine financial adjustments," he said. "Nothing improper." "Then you won't mind clarifying